Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming here. It's turned into such a beautiful, beautiful day, but it's Saturday. So thank you for being here. My name is Jamie Albert. I'm the Rothman Chair and Director of the Center for the Humanities and the Public Sphere. So I want to welcome you to the second lecture of our annual speaker series, Page Unbound, Humanities in the Digital Age. This academic year, our series has been supported by a number of co-sponsors, so I want to start by acknowledging them and their generous donations. The Margaret and Robert Rothman Endowment, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Smathers Libraries, Early Arte's beautiful room, Center for Arts, Migration, and Entrepreneurship, the African American Studies Program, Spanish and Portuguese Studies, the Hart Museum of Art, and the Digital World Institute. I'd also like to take a moment to thank the staff of the Center for Humanities and the Public Sphere who worked so hard to put together these beautiful events and order food for everyone and make sure everything runs smoothly. Associate Director Sarah Angelli, Office Manager Rhonda Black. Where's Rhonda? She's probably taking care of important business at the moment. Communications Manager Christina Foreman, right here. Program Coordinator Noah Mullins, sitting next to Sarah, and Program Coordinator Allison Walsh. Right. Thank you guys, let's give them a round of applause. Our series this year is part of the Center's broader Digital Humanities Initiative, through which we seek to build awareness about the ways digital technologies can shape our humanities research, can convene students and scholars from different backgrounds to pursue digital humanities projects, and just generally to explore the way that emerging technology is affecting our personal, our social, our political, our personal, professional lives. Today, I am thrilled to be welcoming the second speaker in our series, Dr. Lyneise Williams. She's Associate Professor Emerita of Art History at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She's the author of Latin Blackness in Parisian Visual Culture, 1852 to 1932, which examines how Parisian's visual language of Latin Americans in popular imagery inextricably links blackness to Latin American identity, beginning in the mid-19th century and into the early 20th century. She is co-founder and visual image and representation researcher in the Advancement Information Collaboratory at AIC. Founder and director of VERA, the Visual Electronic Representations in the Archive Collaborative, advocating for culturally responsible practices that address the significant erasures of visual material and historical representation in technology. She presented AIC and VERA collaborative research at the Library of Congress, the National Park Service, the British Library, the National Archives in the UK, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, the Alan Turing Institute, and the Intimate Data Ensuring Equity as Psychiatry Embraces Boundless Data and AI conference at the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. VERA Collaborative is one of the founding co-partners of the Advancement Information Collaboratory, and they both co-partnered on a team that received a grant from the National Park Service to create a cutting-edge digital asset management system for the Mary McLeod Bethune Archives. In addition, AIC and VERA were awarded grants from the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences. She's presented at the IEEE annual conference a couple of times and published articles in the IEEE conference proceedings. Her art, historical, and visual culture research explores the intersection of glamour, sports, technology, fashion, masculinity, and the Black male athletic body in 1920s and 30s Paris. Her third book project examines ideas about trauma, care, community, African American spirituality, and material culture as they converge in two cloth reliquaries made by an African American traditional healer in late 1920s at Yale, South Carolina. In fall 2016, she served as a Getty Scholar Fellow at the Getty Research Institute, and she's published articles on the paintings of Uruguayan artist Pedro Figari, the depictions of Panamanian boxer Alfonso Brown, as well as on African art and hip-hop jewelry She was appointed by Chief Justice of the State of North Carolina Supreme Court to serve on the North Carolina Chief Justice Advisory Commission on Portraits. And she's curated exhibitions on African art, as well as art of the African diaspora. Tomorrow night, she's going to be giving a talk at the Harm. Thank you. And I'm just going to put a little notice about that. We'll start at 6 p.m. It's entitled Presenting Pedro Figari, Role Switching, Code Shifting, and the Aesthetics of Power. You are all invited to that tomorrow night at 6 p.m. I'll certainly be there, and it would be really good to see you. Earlier today, we were privileged to be led in a workshop by Dr. Williams on Minecraft as a mirror, thinking about how video games mirror our human values. And today, we are very excited to hear her deliver a lecture entitled Decoding Our Messiness, Aesthetics, Technology, and the Human Experience. So please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you all for coming out. If you're anything like me, you probably had 1,000 other things you could be doing right now, but you're here, and I really appreciate that. So yes, you can see the title of this presentation. I do want to say, I can't thank you all enough, Jamie and Sarah and the Dream Team at the Center for the Humanities of the Public Sphere. It has been absolutely delightful and very stimulating to be on this campus. First of all, you're really lucky. It's a beautiful campus. It has a lot of people here who are interested in a wide variety of things so I feel like I'm buzzing like this, but that's a good thing. I'd like to thank Juan Carlos, who is doing our technology today. Thank you very much for everything that you've contributed. I'd like to thank Publix for the cookies. And now I'm going to get started. So, the whole trajectory of working in technology, the way that I'm working in that space, came from this project. It's an art historical project. I had no idea that it was going to lead to where it had one of the paths that I've taken with it. But anyway, it's an art historical project that presented this huge roadblock. And that's when things got interesting, because instead of just sort of leaping over and saying, well, I'm going to push that to the side, I thought, okay, I'm going to go down that path and I'm going to go down this path too. And the path that I took that took me into technology, I knew it might take me outside of how people were defining art history, but I was going to go anyway, because I really needed to know the answers to some questions. And because I was thinking, well, if other people wanted to come after me and do work on these larger topics, they're not going to be able to do that work because of what I found, the implications of some of the technology. So I said, okay, I'm just going to go. I'll deal with it. So in this talk, I will be, in addition to showing you the project and the path that I took with it, I will be identifying different decision points. I did this morning. There are a variety of moments in the construction of most everything, including technology, where people are making decisions. Actual people. Actual people are building things, and actual people are making decisions about what that should look like, how it should work, who we're going to target, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I will identify some of the moments where there can be larger discussions about what gets prioritized and what gets, what's going to get priority, and how that's going to work in a way that recognizes that human beings are making these things and they are meant to be used by humans. So, expanding the situation. So I want to point out, I don't see that as being an insertion of the humanities, because I'm going to present this to you in a way, but in a way that demonstrates that the humanities are always there. The human beings are always there. And because the human beings are always there, the humanity is always there. It's just that certain topics and certain frameworks get prioritized and others do not. So, moving forward. Okay. So, the project was about the creation of the glamorous black athlete as a visual type in mass-produced media in 1920s Paris. This is the image that launched all the other images that we know of, and I will show you some in a few minutes. This was the first time that I could find where strategies for visualizing a black man for visualizing glamour were used on a black subject, this particular image. And this, by the way, what you're looking at, it is this. This is the actual object. And I'm going to have you, at the end, you can come up and look at these and pick these up. These are all mine, you can touch them. So what you're looking at is a reproduction, a digital reproduction of this object. There is a lot happening here that is not happening there, and vice versa. Different things are happening. But when I refer to this image, I will do, and really, I have to try my hardest to do, I would do my best to not say this newspaper, because this is not the newspaper, this is a newspaper. That's a digital reproduction of a newspaper. Okay. So there are a lot of representations of black male athletes that shift from distorted brutes, barely legible masses, threatening figures, to radiant, glossy 1920s celebrities that form the foundation of the larger-than-life superheroes that we know of the present. Centering on diverse portrayals of black Panamanian boxer Alfonso Teofilo Brown, featured here. He was the welterweight champion of the world between 1929 and 1936, and then he lost the title in 36. He regained it in 1938 and lost it again in 1941. Okay, so I'm drawing on archival sources with a particular emphasis on newspapers, sports, and general newspapers, but I also looked at posters, I looked at advertisements, I looked at fashion magazines, as well as the technology of all those different sources to analyze representations and performances. So, yes, the object, the newspaper, materiality and issues that surround it are extremely significant to the project. So you've got a digital copy here, and for example, when you come up and touch this, you'll feel a really satiny surface to it. I can't feel a satiny surface to that at all. But there's a satiny surface to this, which I found out because I did some work with these at the Getty Conservation Institute. There's a clay coating to this, a very light layer of clay. And the clay coating gives it that satiny feel. It makes this somewhat heavy because it is a luxury item. It was the most expensive of the sports newspapers at the moment, and it was the only one that featured that much space for visual images. It was a totally cutting edge newspaper when it came out. The rest of the newspapers at the time looked like this. Now, this is going to take me a minute because this one is sort of in pieces. There were large newspapers like this. So this one is actually playing on this because it's the exact size of this folded in half. At the time that these were being published, and this is from 1927, I have some photographs of people who were walking down the streets with these. They did not fold these, but they did fold these. And when I thought about it, I mean, granted, now when I get them, some people will fold them for me, but at the time, I didn't find any photographs where people actually folded these. And I wondered if it had to do with a value that they were assigning to this newspaper with an image this big, in this climate with these smaller ones. You know, this is like, could have been like a status symbol. So, okay. So this merger of aesthetic objectification and the black male athletic bodies is relatively new. I mean, it's starting in 1927. And this is a more recent example of it. But it first emerged in 1927 Paris. It burst forth in the cover, the newspaper that I showed you, and this was one of the most widely circulated sports weeklies. It was widely circulated in France, but it was also sent to all of the French colonies, in the Caribbean as well. So it's going into the Americas by that route. The complex intersection of photography, particularly glamour photography, associated with the cinema, and rotogravure, which in the 1920s was a cutting-edge photomechanical printing process, and there were also some new strategies in graphic design. Those forces came together in the creation of this. Now, I will explain what photomechanical printing is, and I will also explain what rotogravure is. It's coming up. So I found this newspaper at a flea market by accident. I got off of a train going to an apartment where I was staying in Paris, and I had to walk through this big flea market, and I'm looking at all these stacks of things, and right on the top of the stack of newspapers was that newspaper. And I was so taken with the way he appears, you know, the close-up headshot type format, and he had more in common with a Hollywood cinema star than he did with a battle-scarred boxer. But again, speaking of similarities, what do you see here? Tell me what you see. This is not a rhetorical question.
The positioning is somewhat reminiscent. It gives it almost like a heroic quality.
This is not a trick question. Just tell me what you see. Yes, that too. Yeah, it's an advertisement. It's a Nike ad. And, but in addition to those things, I also see a series of decisions. Lots of different decisions. Somebody decided that they wanted to put his head in profile. They could have had him facing this way, but they decided to have him in profile. The profile shot emphasizes his physiognomy, as you can see. His skin has also been photoshopped to create the illusion of a flawless surface. His cheekbones have been highlighted to build on the physiognomic emphasis, suggesting that they protrude forward into space. Those are three of many other decisions that were made towards this image. That purple, somebody had to decide, oh, we want purple. Somebody else said, maybe green? No, we're going with purple. Decisions. And at each one of those decision points, there's a lot of choices. So there are a lot of other ways that this image could have looked. As I said before, little decisions often turn into big decisions, as we will see. So, here's my interpretation. Nike depicts Kobe Bryant as a conjured enigma. They offer up an idealized, heat-retaining cranium and profile as the visual summation of his otherworldly skills on the basketball court. His head emerges from a red and black formless energy source, perhaps like the term Black Mamba, a term he chose from the film Kill Bill. But the term, especially in that context, carries associations of distorted U.S. ideas about mystery and foreboding that were linked to Afro-Caribbean religion Santeria and Lucumí. Photographer's lighting accentuates high cheekbones and flawless glowing skin. This is supposedly the unvarnished, natural skin of men, where shine and shadow are valued as go-to strategies for playing up manly angularity. Kobe's image codifies a carefully sculpted masculinity that relies heavily on flash photography, saturated color, and Photoshop. And the photomechanical reproduction methods that convert it for the internet that's another layer, that whatever technology they're using for magazines as well as billboards. Images such as this one of beautiful black male athletes are ubiquitous in contemporary American and global culture, and we take them for granted at this point. But there is a beginning point, and I will talk about that. That whole merger, really, it was 1927 Paris. And you can see the two of these side by side. Now, another reason why I was so taken with this when I saw it at the flea market is because most of the imagery of black men at the time looked like this. 1925, this poster, you've got stereotypes. This is Josephine Baker in this representation at the top, and these other two men here with exaggerated eyes and a rictus grin, which is inhuman, and exaggerated lips. Borrowing from the minstrel visual language from all the way from the US. On the far side, the all coons look alike to me. That's sheet music that's coming from the US and making its way to Paris. Making its way to Paris in the bags of musicians, jazz musicians, white and black, going to Paris. Here's another example on the far side, and on this side is an illustration by Paul Collat, where it's a more graphic. He's playing with graphic design differently here, where he's got playing with angularity. That's an impossible pose on the figure. He's also borrowing some of the visual language of US minstrelsy. You can see the enlarged lips. So I was used to seeing this. And, horrible every time I had to look at it, but that's what was circulating in popular culture at the time. So to all of a sudden see this, it's startling. This was also in circulation, cartoons. The early 1920s was the early 1900s was the beginning of the sports cartoon. And we see two different versions of heavyweight boxer Jack Johnson. On the left side, He's depicted as sort of this jovial giant with these spindly little legs and this tiny little head. He's pulling back like this, so he almost looks as though he could be knocked over with a feather. On the far right side, it's sort of the opposite. He is positioned very aggressively and to justify what he has done in the back. His big body and his posture sort of underscores the fact that you've got these men, these other figures that are lying on the floor around him, and he's ready to do some more damage. So that's the scope of the imagery that was in circulation in 1925. This is absolutely unusual. It looked unusual when I saw it. I thought maybe it was something, I actually didn't really know what I was seeing when I saw it. I just thought, this is Al Brown, I'm already studying him, and what is this? What is happening here, basically? But because I had this, okay, I forgot. I took this with me and I had to leave the country, right? Later on, I'm doing research. I wanted to know if he was on other covers of this. So I went to a digital database. And when I went to that digital database, I found this. Let me see. Okay. I will talk about this in detail. The difference between these two is this is a cutting edge printing process called photomechanical reproduction. It's a printing process where the surface is prepared using light combined with the chemicals and mechanical treatment. And the surface is inked, pressed on paper. It's this one actually is how photomechanical is just the whole process of printing on newspapers. So actually it could be done in a lot of different ways. This particular newspaper is done in a particular kind, but it makes a difference how it's printed. There are two different images of Michael Jordan here. One of them is printed in the halftone process. I wanted you to see what a difference technology makes in terms of imaging. That's halftone, and this one is not. Halftone is a printing technique that it uses dots in a continuous tone to create the illusion of dark areas and light areas. So if you look at it, it's almost like pixelated, where you see these little units coming together to make a variety of different tones. But halftone doesn't give you any subtleties. It works for lighter tones. As you can see those better, then you can see the darker tones. But think about what the implication of that is for people who have darker skin. That's what happens. And when you come up at the end, I will let you take a look at a halftone newspaper from that period. And there are photos of Al Brown here, which are barely legible. Because the technology just can't achieve anything differently. And that's because the technology wasn't made by people who were thinking about the whole range of human beings who could be reproduced in the technology. But the technology was actually made for text. So that just wasn't a part of the discussion. Representations of human beings. Text, black, whites, darks and light colors. So in that way, there's no flexibility with that. That's what another image of Al Brown in halftone. You have a sort of modelly, darks here, lights here. If you think of that and you think of this, or you think of this, same technology, extremely different. But that technology has clear limitations when it comes to imaging people whose skin is not white. Rotogravure, that's the really cutting edge thing. That's a completely different technology than halftone. It's coming from the rotogravure, it's coming from the halftone, the photogravure process. And in photogravure was a method of processing for really fine quality photographs. So they adapted it to be used in newspapers. Instead of a flat plate, that was engraved, that was then inked and then printed, they adapted it to a textile cylinder, a metal cylinder, so that it could be rolled and printed for newspapers. And it made all the difference in the world. It revolutionized the way Black people and anybody whose skin wasn't white could be seen. Because now there were more possibilities. With halftone, there just weren't that many possibilities for what they could do. So the decisions were limited even. But with rotogravure, you could actually play with glamour. And they were already playing with glamorizing white actors and white people in the cinema. This is coming from the same technology that was used in Hollywood. And this is, that's the beginning of the headshot and the sort of glossy, the head type glossy. And this surface also gives it a little bit of that gloss. So, but this magazine was trying to make itself different from all the other sports magazines. There were smaller ones, and I'll talk about this in a moment because this too is rotogravure, but it looks drastically different because they're not manipulating it like they did this. There are smaller ones, but this one was doing very different things graphically. They were really playing with collage. The whole, I guess this was not, so this is precursor to Photoshop. Because before Photoshop, there were people working at light tables, tables with lights coming from underneath, and they would cut out all the pieces in a layout and then photograph that and then print that. That's what they're doing here. But those people didn't come into being. That labor wasn't a part of the practice until rotogravure, this technology. The layout artist was created because of this technology. The photo art director was created. These people actually did a lot of handwork on these. They would cut out all the layouts, but in also doing that, they would touch up images. So when you come and look at this, you'll see little lines where people have actually taken a brush and taken certain things out, highlighted things. They covered up his black eye. But yeah, they were trying to make a statement as being an absolutely different sort of modern magazine. And I believe that in doing that, they're also trying to figure out how to make these men look modern according to the way that they are defining them. And one of the ways in which they were making them look modern was through glamour photography. This is another example of what was being done with rotogravure. It's a very different use of the technology and a very different use of imaging. This is not glamour photography. But this is another choice that was in circulation at the time that they could have made, but they did not make that choice. And here I wanted to give you an example of what two sports magazines. Now, that slide is deceptive because the size of those are different, as you can see. But yes, this one is also rotogravure. But it doesn't look like this. There's a different emphasis on what part of the body they want to image. Here, they've got the two heads, just the heads, which immediately calls up the Hollywood headshot. The lighting immediately calls up the headshot. They're thinking action. They're thinking, what's the whole scene? How much of this can we show in an image? Let's show some of the audience. You can see it here, you can see the audience there. And let's get a photograph of the actual action. So you get a full body. But they're not touching it up. They're not using glamour lighting. So it's actually somewhat fuzzy. When you come up and take a look at it, you can look at them in comparison. So this is revolutionary, this technology. And I want to talk about the photography of this because, you know, photography had a huge role in the way in which this is being reproduced. So you got these a tight close-up featuring the heads of Brown and the opponent that he had just defeated the night before, Eduardo Mascal. It fills up that whole image rather than the arms and legs that activated boxing in the smaller magazine. Most of his face is enveloped in a shimmering pool of light, one of the ways that his image defies or at least elides the usual racial categories of the era's mass market publications. Through lighting and retouching, his complexion largely matches that of Mascal. The radiance emanating from his face's right side nearly washes out all of the contours of his nose and mouth. His mouth is open and engaging. His eyes have these lights reflecting, so it looks like there's a flicker to them. And positioning him slightly above Mascal surely nods to the conventions of elevation of where the victor is given a relatively higher status. And to complicate matter, here this positioning serves to undercut any reading of Brown's ethnic background as inferior. So there's a lot of different things happening here on a lot of different levels. The fact that the boxer's faces dominate here situates the image in conversation with portrait publicity and glamour photography that was related to the cinema and on the rise in the United States and imported to Paris. This newspaper was printed in a building that also housed a 500-seat theater. And every day and all day they showed Hollywood films. So the owner of the newspaper is very keyed into a certain kind of aesthetic. Here you can see there's Rudolph Valentino. You can see a clear relationship in the image of Brown and this one of Valentino. By 1915, portrait publicity and glamour photography engaged innovative and imaginative lighting and composition techniques like cropping, soft focus, to create the illusion of otherworldly light radiating from bodies. Photography's role in this intertwined process is all the more remarkable in light of its tacit biases. Richard Dyer has observed that photographic media, quote, assume privilege and construct whiteness. The apparatus was developed with white people in mind. Photographing non-white people is typically construed as a problem. So photography was never invented for imaging people of color. This is the Shirley card. This is a 1944 Shirley card. It references photos that Kodak used for technicians to balance exposure, colors, and hues. And I think about Noah, you were talking about using a disposable camera. When those were printed a while back, you had to take them to like a CVS and drop it off. And then they would print it in this big machine. Well, those big machines were calibrated with this photograph. Shirley actually worked for the Kodak company. She was an administrative assistant. And so they grabbed her and said, you know, we want to take a picture of you so that all the machines that were developing Kodak film, and Kodak film was all over this country and several other countries. All of those machines were calibrated to her skin tone. That's one of the biases in photography that we still feel today. The topic was taken up in February 2019 on the popular television show Blackish. That episode, it was the first episode of the season, and it opened with Rainbow speaking angrily to the principal of Jack and Diane's school, that's Diane, about how the photographer's shortcomings resulted in Diane's appearance as a dark shadow rather than a fully lit human being in their class photos. She came home with the photos, and in the photos, she was just dark, and everybody else was well lit. That's the effect of calibrating it to a person's skin who's very light and not thinking about the fact that you have to do other subtle things to that entire image if you've got multiple tones. This is Ava Borowski. She's the director of photography for Issa Rae's show Insecure. And she says, quote, in an interview, she says, when I was in film school, no one ever talked about lighting non-white people. She said, and she also said, there are all these general rules about lighting people of color, like throw green light or an amber light at them. It's weird. These rules are a start, but they're far from a complete picture. She said, the secret to making television resemble film is providing different levels of light to the scene. That's all that it takes. She says, in sitcoms, everything is the same level of brightness. That's what I'm trying to avoid. The trick is keeping light off the walls. If you keep it off the walls, you can expose the faces and still have a cinematic look. So there are strategies for doing it, but they're not even teaching that in schools. I mean, I think relatively recently, it's happening because Spike Lee is on faculty at NYU in the film school. So he teaches that. They were also, some of the HBCUs have film programs. They teach it there, but generally, and she's not the only person who's ever said this, generally it's just not taught. Technology is not neutral. Technology is designed and constructed by human beings living in specific contexts with specific values. Human beings have preferences and biases. Those preferences and biases are built into the technology they create. Now, and then I have priorities, but just to show you that some preferences and biases we accept, and then others, we accept a lot. For instance, people always say a camera adds 10 pounds. Here's what's actually happening. It's the lens is actually flattening bodies. And as it flattens bodies, it stretches the image that way. We've all accepted that. That's just what cameras do. That's what we say. And it is just what cameras do. But it's built into that technology to do that. It wasn't intentionally someone saying, oh, let me just do this so we can make everybody have 10 extra pounds. No, it's just that in order for them to get, they prioritize one thing, but in doing so, this other thing happened. And we all know about it, and we all just say, okay, we'll compensate by doing this, this, and this. So biases are not necessarily bad. Preferences are not necessarily bad, but they're there. And I'm saying this because we really need to recognize that preferences and biases are in everything that we do, because we have preferences and we have biases. You all decided you wanted to wear what you have on today, right? That's a preference. It's not a bad thing, but that's what we're talking about. Okay, so again, here's that horrible image I saw when I went online. And I was just like, wait, what is going on here? And that's when I started to explore the object. Thank goodness I had the object, because if I didn't have this, and the first image I saw of him was that, I wouldn't know anything about rotogravure. I would not have taken this path into technology, because I had the two of them, I had to make sense of this. I had to figure out, why does this look like this? What? So I did. So I had a fellowship at the Getty, and we explored the paper, the technology of several of these newspapers to see how they affected each paper. If the paper, what was happening with the paper itself, if there were surfaces on the paper. This paper feels satiny smooth. This paper, very rough and scratchy. That was me diving in as an art historian to try to answer some questions. What is going on here? If this can revolutionize, why wouldn't they stay with this? And so I did some exploring, and in the US, yeah. Here's rotogravure. They had rotogravure, but this is what they were doing. They were doing something very different with it. They had it earlier than they had it in Paris. That's 1911. But then, I went to some African American newspapers, and I thought, look at how it distorts those. These are images from the Library of Congress, from the newspapers. If you were to go and download this is what it looks like. This is the historical record. Here's what happened. In 1927, this comes out. By 1930, the Library of Congress starts to experiment with microfilming. And I'm thinking you all have heard of microfilming is a type of film that is used to image at this point, they're imaging these things to store it so that you don't have to keep that object. So they're experimenting with that. One of the things I found out about microfilming when I was doing research was that film is only made to record very dark colors and very light colors, period. Everything that falls in between that gets lost. Minimized, diminished. And so again, there are limitations to microfilming. So if you microfilm this, it's gonna look somewhat like that, But that's actually two layers, because after they started, so they start experimenting in 1930. By 1940, Library of Congress sent memos to all the libraries and said, we got a way for you to get rid of your newspapers and free up some space. Microfilm all your newspapers and trash the rest. So that's what people did. So they microfilmed the newspapers, and then by 2000, when the Library of Congress starts to experiment with digitizing, The first things they digitized were the microfilmed newspapers. So now you've got two layers of technology where none of it is recognizing, well, there are a lot of things that they're not recognizing. Okay, roadblock. I have roadblock here because I'm thinking to myself, well, if somebody wanted to do a project, do some sort of research on representations of any sort of people of color group in mass media like newspapers, you kind of can't, because you can't see them. And not only that, the newspapers are gone. There are two repositories of newspapers in the country. One is at Salt Lake City. The other one is at Duke University. Well, I used to teach at UNC, and so I rushed right over to Duke University to try to find newspapers. So I thought, let me start with black newspapers, African American newspapers. Oh, we don't have any. They don't have any. So this information is gone. I did a presentation at a conference where some two professors from Stanford came up and asked me and said to me, you know, you might be able to get that through AI. We can see what we can pull from the digitized image and the microfilm image. And we tried for, 3 straight months? Nothing. It's gone. So it's gone from the historical record, that information. It's just gone. Unless somebody has some newspaper sitting around, and at this point, the paper that they were using in the United States is not the paper that they were using in France. So it's probably not around. And I have gone to a lot of different places to try to figure this out. So just to review, microfilm is made to record high contrast print. It's made to record print. So it distorts or minimizes any tone that's in between that. Microfilming, transformation technology, and the decisions to use these particular ones have erased already marginalized people of color from the historical record. That information no longer exists. And it didn't have to be that way. And here's why. Okay. So, aesthetic material. In the early 2000s, when they began experimenting with that, and they got rid of the hard copies. Digitizing flattens it out. So if you're looking at anything pre-2006 on the internet, it's been distorted by 2 different layers. This is just to show you my track of research. Grayscale, this is to show you the DPI that's used, digital asset specifications. There are these government organizations that make these rules about how things get digitized. So I was just showing you that. These are some of the technical guides for digitizing cultural heritage materials. And they tell you it may not be possible, but they don't really give you that much information. But they are, due to photographic limitations of microfilm and the variable quality of older microfilm, it may not be possible to produce what would be normally considered quality images. They know it's happened. They'll tell you it's happened. But now here comes some other aspects that we could bring into this. This happened at a particular moment in time. They start experimenting in 1930. In 1914, Woodrow Wilson segregated all the federal offices. That means there's no one there to advocate, sitting at the table when they're making that decision to advocate for any person of color. Not only that, I mean, when I do work like I did work on the National Park, nobody's asking the specialists, the people who do work with images, anything about this. So it's not like they said in 1930, oh, let's get some art historians on this team. Before we make that decision, let's ask around to the people who could be thinking about what these images or these newspapers could possibly be used for. And how do I know this? Because I did a presentation at the National Archives and Records Administration, and they told me. They just flat out told me, oh, we've never even thought about that before. And that's a conversation. They said, we would have never believed you if we hadn't seen this. And this is the first time, because these guidelines are their guidelines and the guidelines of the Library of Congress for digitizing the number of DPI. They said it was the first time they had seen how destructive their guidelines were. Transformation technology and the choice to use these particular ones have erased, I can't say that enough. But anyway, transformation technology is not neutral. Its creation and use by human beings occur at specific moments. 1914, that's the middle of Jim Crow, when the laws of segregation are legal. That is a big consideration for if you're thinking about why did that happen? And why do this now even? If you're having a conversation about what you're going to do, that's a part of the conversation. That's history. That's cultural history, that's social history. All of that plays into the erasure of records that we say we want to hold on to. So the failure to interrogate technology and racial beliefs resulted in an erasure of the US historical record, and it really didn't have to be that way. Decisions in technology impact how people are portrayed and remembered. Recognizing and prioritizing the specificity of human experience in relation to the forces of specific moments and places can result in more informed decisions. So as you're working if you're working in technology, there are moments. There are lots of moments when you're making decisions. There's lots of moments where we make decisions in the humanities. But the humanities, the human experience exists in technology. It's already there. What we have to do is prioritize questions that are related to the human experience within those spaces. Thank you. I can take questions if anybody has questions. Yes?
Yeah, relating to what you said about like technology, do you think there's also a problem with like software, specifically like lighting correction, like after the photos are taken? Like the fact that lighting correction is more geared towards like, certain people and not others?
Sure. And not only is it geared that way, but it's set into your phone. You can't change certain things about it. And so then it's naturalizing a certain way to be seen. And everybody just goes with that. You have to take it because that's how the phones are set up. A lot of times, most of the time, they don't tell you that's how they're setting it up.
So what steps do you think that like technology companies can like use in order to make it like more suitable for everyone?
Talk to people. As you're making those, before you make a decision to set the camera to be a certain way, talk to people about how they see themselves, how they image themselves. Yeah, there's lots of conversation. There's a lot of room for conversations to gather information. It's just, it doesn't really occur to people. It's not built into the way that things are made. It's not built into the way people are even taught. In programs like, I have some friends who are engineers, and they They know about all this. I worked with them on the National Park Service, and they're like, we never heard of any of this stuff. And recently they showed me their syllabi from MIT, which made it clear. They don't even teach anything like this. There's no way we would never know anything about this because there's no intersection. So it's the conversations that need to be had because the technology can be made however you want it to be made because you're making it. So it's not like, the pieces come in the box and say, oh, you got to put me together like this. That's the only way it can go. No, you're making the pieces. Yes?
Did you ever look into trying to find the original of this picture? Some newspapers kept their photos in a separate
Yeah, photo archives. Guess what? I did. No, I really did. Because I was like, oh. Somebody said, go find the archive. I did, but here's the thing. That's not how people saw this. People saw it in a newspaper. That's how people experienced it. People didn't line up and go to photo archives to ask to look at a boxing picture. So that's an artificial state. If I want to know how people actually experienced it, I need that object. So that's why I've been going all around the US trying to find other images and things like that. But that's a great question.
To make up for the fact that so much of this information has been lost because of the way the photographs were published and digitized and microfilm, finding and collecting and preserving the original photos if they're still around.
If they're still around. There was the newspaper, the Baltimore African American, the building burnt down. All that stuff is gone. Ebony Magazine, they have a huge archive, but they also had, Ed Johnson Publishing Company in Chicago, they kept all the image storage, was on the top floor of the building, and they had barbecues on the roof. And so everything is permeated with that smell and and smoke has come through and sort of impacted a lot of the negatives they have too. I mean, they're storing these, this is a part of the issue that the tension. How do we store all this stuff? And how do we store it safely? And people couldn't. Newspapers. This paper tears really easily. It's disposable, it's quick. It's supposed to be, that's why this is the least expensive newspaper at the time, because they're using the cheapest paper. But the cheapest paper is going to fall apart really quickly. And people didn't want that in the libraries or in their homes, for that matter. But these images, people framed them. They would cut this out because they have instructions in here on how to cut this out and put it in a frame for your house. It's got a very different valence to it in terms of imagery. Yes?
This was very, very interesting. Thank you very much. There is a kind of a similar discussion that is going on in film studies right now, in film archive actually, in preservations of film.
Mm-hmm.
Because the problem is that the same things is happening with the celluloid, with the kind of the support,
Yes.
where most of the films were preserved. And now like 98% of the investments are made to digitalization, to the transfer to digital. But of course, a lot of informations are lost in this shift. And what I'm thinking is that basically this is a story that has been happening every time that there is a technological shift. A lot of things are lost, a lot of things are not preserved, and the problem is that what can we do with it? Because as you were saying, a lot of those newspapers are not eternal. They will die very soon. As much as many films of the silent era, for example, have been lost right now, and they've been lost in the support that they were meant to be screened and preserved. So the problem is that what can we do to prevent every technological shift to lose a lot of information, to lose a lot of history?
Well, I don't know if there's anything you can do to prevent all of it, but I would say if you know that there's a pattern of this technology, not being able to to carry through the information of an original, then why don't you make different technology? I mean, digitizing was there, but that didn't mean we had to use that if that wasn't appropriate. You know, somebody made that, make something else. Knowing the specificity of what you're making it for. I mean, I'm not saying that that's some quick thing that you can do in a week, but I'm saying that if you are thinking about addressing something like this, and you know that historically there is this pattern of behavior, change the pattern. Change the behavior.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So my question is, since there's a talk about like we need to communicate with engineers, right? And I'm wondering, how did you foster the communication between different disciplines? Or how would you imagine a more welcoming, mutually beneficial communication between like two different parties? Because I do feel like humanists are always in disadvantaged position to talk about technology because they assume that we know nothing. You know, how to cultivate that communication, like probably on equal terms?
Okay, well, this morning when we did a workshop, we did it in a humanities building, in a tech building here on campus. And so the director of that building was there. And so he saw this workshop that I was doing. And then he started to think of all these ways in which there was overlap in terms of what I was doing and what projects he was working on. So I think that, well, okay, let's break it down. These building, you have a beautiful campus. So you can see your campus. I would walk the campus and I would actually show up at the places where I'd want to have the conversations. I do that all the time. All the time. But there was something being fostered with the Humanities Center because he held a workshop that I did, and all of a sudden he saw the intersections. And so he wants to do more. But Jamie walked over to that building and talked to him. And you walk to the buildings, go find people. It took me about 7 months to find somebody at the National Archives. And because they're not listed online, they don't have people's emails, they don't have the staff. I found them because I found a conference that they had gone to and they had information. And so I emailed 6 people, nobody responded to me. Then I emailed 5 more people, nobody responded to me. And then I emailed 3 people and 1 guy responded. And he said, I'm retiring in a month and this is going to be my goodbye. Bring it. And that's how I got the appointment. And once I got that appointment, I presented to these 9 people, and that's where they said to me, we've never seen how destructive our practices are, our guidelines. I can't believe, oh my gosh, we did that? This is horrible. And so I left that appointment and went to have lunch with a friend, and I got a notification, and it was an email from the Library of Congress. And they said, oh, well, we heard you have some evidence that talks about our digitizing process. So clearly somebody at the National Archives called Library of Congress. And they said, can you come and show this to us? And I said, sure. I said, I'm in town for 2 days. They said, can you come at 2? And I said, I'll be there at 2. I showed up at 2 o'clock. I did the whole presentation for them. They were shocked because whenever you print this out, it has Library of Congress at the top. It's their stationery. It's on the top. It's there. So they were awful. I mean, they said this was awful. They have to do something about it. They asked me to do a residency there, and then they dropped the ball. But then I left, met with another friend, got notification from the National Park Services. they said, oh, we hear you have some evidence that points to erasing, blah, blah. And can we, would you show that to us? And I said, sure. I'm here for another 2 days. They said, come tomorrow. So I went there. They had the best response. Their response, I did the presentation for them, and they said, can we put you on a grant? We just gave this team a grant, and we want to put you on that grant because we realized after listening to you that everything in Mary McLeod Bethune's archive, we're going to be making representations, and we had not thought about that. So they literally put me on a team with 3 engineers and 2 computer scientists. That's how you do that. That's one way. But here, the thing about it here, you have access to people. They're right here. You can just walk into their buildings, make appointments with them during their office hours. It's way easier. I would definitely start there. Between that and the places like the center that's already bringing people together for these kinds of conversations, you all can do that right here. Yeah, you don't have to wait until you leave. Because if you do it here and then take that out, that's how you affect change. That's how you affect change. Yes?
So with the AI coming into the picture, so do you think these biases would be implicated into the AI models that we have right now?
They're already there. They're amplified.
Yeah. So what could be a possible solution to that?
I'm sorry?
What could be a possible solution to reduce the bias? Because having it 0 wouldn't make sense, right? But what could be a possible solution to reduce the bias in those, at least in terms of representations in the pictures that are being generated by the large language models?
Well, in terms of bias, okay, there are a lot of other people who have written on bias in AI. A lot of people who've written on that. One of the things that I would say is it would be different if the companies that are using that material are telling you that. Well, we kind of got this material, we didn't really look at that. But the companies aren't even willing to tell the artists and the people online whose material they scraped that they have it. So there's some ethical issues there. And money. Yeah. There are ways in which they didn't have to think about copyright if they just scraped it and then said, oops. So that is very complicated. I would say look at the people who have actually studied that because I haven't. No, I definitely have not studied that. What I'm saying is, we can't keep doing this. We can't keep making things without thinking of the implications of the things that we're making. And the implications of that should be, in my mind, a part of how we're thinking through making that thing. And if we are not the only people who we think, our imaginations are limited. We need to get more people in the room. The more people in the room, theoretically, that are specific to what we're thinking, like historians who can say, well, look at the time, look around, look at what's happening right now. Is there anything that's happening right now that's shaping how we're deciding to make this? That's a good question, I don't think that's how people are thinking. At any level, I'm not saying you have to do it at every level, but it ought to be a part of the conversation. People who, if you have a medical tool, if you don't ask the doctor who uses that tool how he's going to use that tool, what? Ask the specialist. In a university, it's even easier because then you just go to the art department. Go to the art historians. Oh, you think, how else does this image appear? Oh, they're using it like this in history? Go get some historians. And then you just walk around to the campus and find them. Oh, yeah. Use this space. test out things. Universities are great spaces for that because they put everybody together in this, on this campus. Okay, well, look, there's some of those Publix cookies over there. Thank you all so much. Oh, and you can look at these.